Hook. Approximately 100 words. He had $18 left in the world. That was it. $18 standing between his daughter and hunger. And then a stranger sat down beside him at the bus stop, hands shaking, counting coins she didn't have. He didn't think twice. He gave her everything. Every last dollar. Walked home with empty pockets and told himself it was the right thing. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have possibly known, was that the woman he'd just helped was worth more than he could imagine. And she was already looking for him. If an act of kindness can change a life, watch this story to the end. Hit like and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Part 1. The letter was short. That was the thing Logan kept coming back to. After 4 years. 4 years of early shifts and late nights, and never once calling in sick, not even when Emma had her tonsils out and he sat beside her hospital bed on his lunch break and cried in the stairwell so she wouldn't see. After all of that, the letter was 9 lines long. He'd counted. He counted it twice standing in the HR office while Karen from HR looked at him with that particular expression people make when they're trying to seem sympathetic but mostly just want you to leave. We have completed our investigation and regret to inform you. Logan? Karen had said his name like she was reminding him of it. I'm sorry, I know this is difficult. I didn't take anything. He heard his own voice and was surprised how flat it came out. Not angry, just flat, the way things go when the ground drops out from under you. The inventory discrepancy was there before I started that shift. I logged it. I flagged it in the system at 7:14 in the morning. You can check. He looked at her. She looked at her desk. Did you check? Our loss prevention team. Did anyone check? She folded her hands on top of the manila envelope. The decision has been made, Logan. I'm sorry. He took the envelope. It had his last paycheck in it, prorated, and a form about COBRA insurance he could not afford. He thanked her. He actually thanked her, which he regretted as soon as he said it, but that was the kind of man he was, and he didn't know how to be different. And he walked out through the stockroom floor he'd worked for 4 years, past guys who looked away because they'd already heard, out through the loading dock, and stood in the parking lot in the November cold without a coat because he'd left it inside and he wasn't going back in. He stood there for a minute, maybe 2. Then he got in his car and drove to Emma's school. Emma was waiting on the front steps when he pulled up, 7 years old and wearing her backpack on both shoulders the way she always did, already scanning the pickup line for his car. She found him before he'd even pulled to a full stop. She had her mother's eyes. That particular shade of dark brown that caught light in a way that made you feel like you were being seen straight through. And she was using them on him right now in a way that told him she already knew something was wrong. She climbed in and buckled her seatbelt. "Why are you early?" she said. "Thought we'd get some extra time together." "You got off work early?" He looked in the rearview mirror. "I'm done with that job, bug." She was quiet for a second. "Did you quit?" Something like that. Emma processed this with the kind of careful quietness that 7-year-olds who have been through hard things develop. She didn't ask more. She looked out the window at the passing houses, and Logan drove, and neither of them spoke for a few blocks, and Logan was grateful for it. "Can we have grilled cheese tonight?" she said finally. "We can have grilled cheese." "The kind with tomato?" "The kind with tomato." She seemed satisfied with this and took out a library book from her backpack. Logan drove home through the side streets to avoid the tolls. The apartment was small in the way that small apartments are small. Not bad exactly, just close. They'd been there 2 years since he had to sell the house after the hospital bills from Claire's last 3 months had finished doing what they'd started doing the year before. The house had been Claire's idea. The kind of place with a backyard and a kitchen big enough to cook in, and after she died, Logan had kept it for 8 months out of something he told himself was practicality and knew was grief. And then he'd sold it and moved them here. He'd done his best with the apartment. Emma had the bigger bedroom. She had a reading nook he'd built from plywood and an old mattress cushion, and fairy lights she'd picked out herself, and photographs of her mother on the wall that she'd arranged herself at age 5 and had not allowed him to move since. Logan slept on a pull-out couch he'd converted into a permanent bed and kept a curtain across the alcove for privacy that mostly worked. He made the grilled cheese. He cut Emma's the way she liked, diagonal, And he put tomato slices under the top layer the way Claire used to do it, and they ate at the kitchen table with Emma reading her book because he'd never made a rule against reading at dinner. He did the math in his head while she read. Rent was due in 11 days. The electric bill was 2 weeks late. Emma needed new shoes. Her current pair had a crack developing in the left sole that he'd been sealing with adhesive every few days, and knowing he couldn't keep it up much longer. He had $140 in his checking account, which was actually better than it sometimes got. But the way it usually went was he'd get paid on Friday, cover what was overdue, and come out the other side with almost nothing until next Friday, and there was no next Friday now. He did the math again, hoping for a different result. He got the same result. After Emma was in bed and her light was off, and he'd sat in the hallway outside her door the way he'd done since she was a baby. Not from anxiety exactly, more from the habit of it, from the way those few quiet minutes had become the thing that told him the day was over, and they'd both made it. He went to his wallet. One crumpled 20. 3 ones. His bank card. An old grocery store rewards card. $23. He put the 20 back in the billfold and carried the 3 ones to the kitchen and checked the change drawer. $4 and some change. Quarters, a few dimes, some pennies he'd been ignoring. He counted it twice on the kitchen table. $18.40. He put it in his jacket pocket and sat down at the table with his phone and started scrolling job listings with the kind of focused desperation that looks calm from the outside but isn't. The next morning, he dropped Emma at school and spent 3 hours filling out online applications at the library because the Wi-Fi was better there. He applied for 8 jobs. He sent 2 emails to people he knew who'd mentioned openings that might or might not still be open. He ate nothing because he hadn't thought to bring anything, and when the librarian at the desk, a woman in her 60s named Meredith, who'd helped Emma find the Ramona Quimby books last year, asked if he was okay, he said yes and meant it mostly. He picked Emma up at 3. She had a permission slip for a field trip that cost $12. He signed it and put it in his pocket and didn't think about the $12 until later. They ate cereal for dinner because he was out of almost everything else. Emma didn't complain. She never complained about food, which was something he was grateful for, and also something that quietly gutted him every time he noticed it, because it meant she'd already adjusted her expectations in ways he hadn't asked her to and couldn't undo. He told her a story before bed, one of the ongoing ones they'd been building together for months, about a girl named Mira who discovered she could talk to birds and was slowly putting together a mystery about a missing lighthouse keeper. Emma had strong opinions about Mira's character and regularly corrected him when he got her wrong. Tonight she fell asleep about halfway through, and he sat for a moment in the quiet of her room listening to her breathe. He didn't know what he was going to do. He wasn't catastrophizing. He was just being honest with himself in the way you can only be honest in the dark when no one else is awake to see it. He didn't know. He had $18, a stack of applications with no responses yet, no references from his old job because getting fired for cause, even false cause, made that complicated, and a 7-year-old who needed new shoes and a field trip and dinner. He wasn't a man who gave up. He didn't have the personality for it. But not giving up and knowing what to do aren't the same thing, and right now he was better at one than the other. He tucked the blanket around Emma's shoulder and went back to the kitchen and sat in the dark for a while. Then he put on his jacket and went out. He didn't have a reason to go out, not a specific one. He was too wound up to sleep, and the apartment felt like it was shrinking when he sat still. He walked 4 blocks to the 24-hour convenience store and bought nothing, just looked at the rows of things he couldn't buy, then stood outside and breathed cold air until his head cleared a little. The bus stop was on the corner outside the store. He sat on the bench more out of exhaustion than intention, forearms on his knees staring at the gum-stained sidewalk. He'd been there maybe 10 minutes when he heard it. The sound was small, just the metallic scatter of coins hitting concrete, then a sharp intake of breath, a low, frustrated sound, and the soft scuffle of someone dropping to their knees to collect them. He looked over. A woman was crouched at the far end of the bench, gathering coins with both hands. She was well dressed in the way that read as money, but careless money. A coat that probably cost more than his monthly rent, dark hair falling loose over her face, makeup that had been done professionally but had smeared badly, and an expression when she finally looked up at him that he recognized. Not distress exactly. Worse than that. The look of someone who has found themselves in a situation that should not be possible and cannot yet. Collected the coins, sat back on the bench, and began counting them in her palm. Logan looked away. Not rudely. He just understood the instinct to count privately, but then she counted them again and again. And each time her face got a little more closed off in a way that was working hard to conceal something. "Bus not running?" he said. Not intrusive, just conversation. She looked at him. She had dark eyes and a composure that was held together through what was clearly an act of sustained will. "I'm trying to figure out if I have enough. For the fare?" "For the fare." He thought about that. He thought about it longer than made sense given the simplicity of the information. There was a woman sitting at a bus stop in an expensive coat who didn't have bus fare. He filed that away under none of his business. "Where are you trying to get?" he said. She hesitated. He got the feeling she was deciding how much information was safe to give a stranger, and he didn't blame her for it. "Midtown," she said. "The Meridian on 54th. The Meridian was a hotel he'd seen from the bus. The kind of hotel where the lobby looked like a museum and the revolving door was polished brass. "That's a $9 fare," he said. "Roughly." "I know." She looked at her hand. "I have $4.60. She said it the way people say things they can't quite believe they're saying, factually, barely. Logan sat with that for a moment. He looked at the intersection, then back at his shoes, then at the woman, who was staring at the coins in her palm with an expression he recognized from his own bathroom mirror. The expression of someone running calculations on a problem that doesn't have a clean solution. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out the $18 and the 40 cents he'd counted on his kitchen table 2 nights ago, and he held it for a second, and he thought about Emma's field trip and Emma's shoes and the electric bill and the rent. He thought about all of it clearly. He wasn't acting without knowing what he was doing. He was doing it knowing exactly what he was doing. He held the money out. "Here," he said. The woman looked at it, then looked at him. "I can't take your money. It's a bus fare." "It's a lot more than a bus fare. It's what I've got." He kept his hand out. "Take it." "Sir, I'm Logan." He said it like the name was the point. "And you look like someone who needs to get somewhere and has been sitting here longer than you wanted to be." She looked at him for a long moment. The composure cracked just slightly, a quiver at the corner of her mouth that she controlled before it got further. Her eyes went bright, and she looked away fast. "You don't know me," she said. "No." "You don't know what's happening with me?" "No." She turned back to him. "Why are you doing this?" He thought about it. Not the quick answer, the real one. "Because I've had nights like whatever this night is for you, and somebody either helped or didn't, and one of those feels better than the other, and I'd rather be the kind of person who helps." She stared at him. He kept his hand out. She took the money. She didn't say much after that. She closed her hand around the bills and the coins and held them the way you hold something you're not sure is real. Her name, she told him this in a very quiet voice, like she was giving him something she didn't usually give, was Victoria. "The hotel," Logan said. "Is someone meeting you there?" "I have a room there," she paused. "I think, as long as my card works." "Your card doesn't work?" She pressed her lips together. "Someone helped make sure it didn't." She said it with a particular careful control that told him there was a lot behind that sentence she wasn't opening. He didn't push. "Will you be okay?" She almost laughed. It came out sideways, not quite a real laugh, but something that had been a laugh once before whatever was happening to her tonight had happened. "Eventually," she said. The bus arrived. She stood, then stopped. "Logan?" She said his name back to him. "Thank you." "Get somewhere warm," he said. She looked at him for just a second longer than necessary, not in a searching way, more like she was committing something to memory. And then she got on the bus, and the doors folded shut, and the bus pulled away from the curb and disappeared down the avenue. Logan sat at the empty bus stop for a few minutes. He had 40 cents left. He thought about Emma. He thought about the permission slip in his pocket and the cracked shoe sole and the 11 days until rent. He thought about the stack of applications he'd sent out that probably nobody had read yet. Then he got up and walked home. It was cold, but it wasn't that far. He was up at 6, the way he always was, habit having replaced alarm clocks years ago. He made Emma's lunch, peanut butter, crackers, an apple from the bowl on the counter, and packed it in her bag. He heated water for oatmeal and put Emma's portion in a bowl and let it cool. He was running through what was left in the cabinet when Emma appeared in the hallway in her pajamas with her hair sticking up in 3 directions. "Why didn't you sleep?" she said. "I slept fine." "Your eyes look like you didn't sleep." He pointed at the oatmeal. "Eat." She climbed onto her chair and looked at him across the table while she ate. He drank his coffee. The last of it, he noted, he'd need to figure out coffee, and tried to look like a man who had a plan. "Are you going to find a new job today?" Emma said. "I'm going to try. My friend Becca's dad got fired and he was sad for a long time." "I'm not sad." "You look a little sad." "I look tired." He pushed his cup aside. "There's a difference." Emma considered this with the seriousness of a child who has decided you're probably right, but isn't fully convinced. "What if you don't find one?" she said. He looked at her. This was the thing about Emma. She didn't ask things to be cruel. She asked things because she genuinely wanted to know, and there was a precision to her concern that he'd never been able to talk her out of. She was 7 years old, and she paid attention, and she worried about him in the careful, private way that he recognized because it was how he worried about her. "I'll find one," he said. "But what if—" "Bug!" He kept his voice even. "I will figure it out. That's my job, okay? The figuring it out part is on me, and you don't need to carry any of that." She ate a spoonful of oatmeal and thought about it. "Okay," she said, then, "Can I still go to Becca's Saturday?" "Yes. Even if us—" "Yes." She went back to her oatmeal, apparently satisfied. He got her dressed and dropped her at school and kissed the top of her head at the front steps and told her to have a good day and stood on the sidewalk and watched her go in. He was 2 blocks from home when the convoy appeared. 3 black SUVs moving in tight formation up the narrow street, which was not built for 3 black SUVs, and the block was not used to them. People walking their dogs stopped and looked. A man on a bicycle had to pull over. The vehicles came to a slow stop in front of his building. Not near it, in front of it, with a precision that suggested someone had given an exact address. And the middle one's rear door opened before it had fully stopped. The woman from the bus stop stepped out. Logan stopped walking. She was different in daylight and different in whatever it was she was wearing now. A dark blazer, hair pulled back, the smeared makeup, and the bus stop composure replaced with something controlled and sharp. She looked like a different kind of person than the one he'd sat beside last night. Or not different, the same person, but standing up straight in their own context. She saw him on the sidewalk. She walked over. "Logan Hayes," she said. He looked at her, then at the SUVs, then at her. "How do you know my last name?" "I looked you up." She said it directly without apology. "I know that's probably alarming. I'm sorry for the alarming part, but I needed to know who you were." He put his hands in his pockets. "Who are you?" She held out her hand. "Victoria Sterling?" The name registered. Not slowly, immediately. Victoria Sterling. He'd heard it in the way you hear names that exist in the background of the world you're moving through. On the radio, on the news tickers at the gas station, once on a magazine Emma had knocked off a rack at the grocery store. Victoria Sterling, the profile had said, had turned a small logistics startup into something worth more than Logan's brain could comfortably attach to a number. He shook her hand. "You were counting coins," he said. "I was counting coins." "At a bus stop." "At a bus stop." She didn't flinch from this. "It was a specific kind of night. I'd like to explain it to you if you'll let me." He looked at the SUVs again. 2 men in dark jackets had gotten out and were standing at a respectful distance watching the street in the practiced way of people whose job is to watch streets. "You can come inside," he said, because it was cold and he had been raised with certain instincts that were difficult to override even when everything about the situation was strange. She nodded. "Thank you. I don't have coffee." "I have coffee," she said, and glanced over her shoulder at the nearest SUV, and a man immediately reached back inside it. And that was the moment Logan understood that the morning had stopped being ordinary and was going to be something else entirely. He held the building door open. Victoria Sterling walked in. Behind her, the convoy waited, engines running, patient and quiet, like it had all the time in the world. The apartment was not made for receiving visitors, and he was painfully aware of this. The pull-out couch with the curtain across the alcove. The crayon drawing Emma had done of the two of them taped to the refrigerator, crooked, deliberately not straightened because she'd put it up and it was hers. The dish rack with 2 plates and 2 bowls. The stack of bills on the corner of the counter, held down by a coffee mug. Victoria Sterling stood in the middle of it and did not look at any of those things in the way people look at things when they're trying not to look at them. She just stood there with the slightly too still posture of someone who is somewhere unfamiliar and is choosing to be okay with it. One of her men had brought coffee, proper coffee in actual cups, with a bag of pastries Logan would not have bought, and set it on the kitchen table with the professional discretion of someone who does this sort of thing regularly, and then left without being asked. Logan sat across from her at the kitchen table. "Last night," she said, "I was in a car coming back from a meeting. My driver stopped at a red light, and 2 men pulled him out. They took my bag, my phone, both my cards. My driver was hurt. Not badly. He's fine. I checked this morning first thing." She said it fast, like the last part was important to establish. "I got out of the car and started walking, and I had nothing. I couldn't call anyone because I had no phone. I couldn't get to my hotel because I had no money, and I was—" She paused, chose the word carefully. "I was not having a functional hour." "Did you call the police?" "Eventually. From the hotel phone, once I got there. They took a report." She said it in a way that told him exactly how useful she expected that to be. "And someone let you use the hotel phone?" The night manager recognized me. A slight dryness in that. Once I said my name enough times in a tone that suggested I wasn't lying. Logan wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. It was very good coffee. He resented how good it was. "You said last night that someone helped make sure your card didn't work." She set down her cup. "I had my cards canceled before the robbery. Someone inside my company flagged them as compromised through our internal system, which routes through the bank partner we use for executive accounts. I didn't know until I tried to use them at the hotel." She looked at him directly. "Someone knew I was going to be in that car at that time. Someone arranged to have me stranded." "That's not a mugging," Logan said. "No," she said. "It's not." He sat with that. "Why are you telling me this?" She looked at her hands on the table. "Because last night, while I was sitting at that bus stop trying to convince myself I was going to be fine, a stranger sat down beside me. A stranger with, as I understand it, very little to give, who gave me everything he had and then asked for absolutely nothing in return and then walked home in the cold." She looked up. "Do you know how rare that is?" "It's a bus fare." "Logan." She said it the same way she'd said it last night, like it meant something specific. "I had my background checked this morning. I know what happened to you at Harmon Distribution. I know the timeline. I know your flag in the system, and I know it was entered 12 minutes after your shift started, before you could have touched a single item from that inventory. Someone set you up." He went very still. She kept going. "I know about your daughter. I know about your wife. I know that you have worked every day for 4 years to keep things together, and that you are currently sitting across from me with less than $1 in your pocket because you gave it away last night." She paused. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel scrutinized. I'm telling you because I needed to understand who you were before I came here. And now you understand who I am." "I think so." "And?" She folded her hands. "I want to offer you a job." The apartment was quiet. Down the hall, someone was running water. Outside, one of the SUVs shifted slightly on the street. "What kind of job?" Logan said. "Operations analyst. You'd be working directly with me. We'd be looking into the internal finances of Sterling Group, specifically the executive accounts and procurement records for the last 24 months. She met his eyes. "I need someone I can trust, not someone who wants something from me, not someone who's been at the company long enough to have their own agenda. I need someone who's good, who's honest, and who has absolutely no reason to protect what's broken." He looked at the refrigerator. Emma's drawing. The crayon smiles, the yellow hair she'd given him despite the fact that his hair was brown, the slightly enormous hands. I don't have an analyst's background. You have 4 years of inventory management, which means you understand supply chain and procurement. You have a clean record and an instinct for inconsistency. You flagged that discrepancy at Harmon before it could be used against you. And you have... She stopped. You sat at a bus stop with nothing and gave it to someone who needed it. That's the thing I can't train for. He looked at her. What does it pay? She named a figure. He made himself not react. Benefits, she said. Full. For you and your daughter. She paused. And Logan, what happened to you at Harmon Distribution? I have resources. If you want to pursue it, I will help you pursue it. He looked down at the table. At the grain of it, the coffee ring from years of mornings. The small scratch Emma had made with a fork when she was 4. He thought about $18. He thought about the way he'd held it on the walk home. Just the memory of holding it, the absence where it had been. I'd need to think about it, he said. She nodded. Of course. And ask some questions. Ask them. He looked up. You said someone inside your company arranged this. You don't know who. I have suspicions. If I'm helping you look into it, I need to know those suspicions. You'll know everything I know. And if what we find implicates someone with more power in the company than you've currently assumed, she didn't hesitate. Then we deal with that. He studied her. She held it without looking away. Give me until this afternoon, he said. Take the morning. I'll have my assistant send you a number to reach me. She stood, and for a moment he saw again what he'd seen last night. Not the billionaire, not the controlled executive, but the woman who'd been counting coins on a bus stop bench in the dark. For what it's worth, she said, you don't look like someone who needs more time. You look like someone who's already decided and is just waiting to make sure it's okay to. He didn't answer that. She picked up her cup, drank the last of her coffee, and set it back down on his kitchen table with the slightly deliberate care of someone who doesn't want to seem like they don't know how to exist in a normal kitchen. Thank you for the coffee, he said. He meant it to be dry, but it came out almost sincere. She smiled. It was the first real one he'd seen from her. It changed her face entirely. The coffee was mine, she said. Thank you for the coffee that was yours. She laughed, a short, actual laugh, and walked to the door and let herself out, and Logan sat at his kitchen table in the quiet apartment and listened to the convoy pull away from the curb. He looked at Emma's drawing on the refrigerator. He thought about what it would mean, what it would cost. What Emma would say, she'd probably have 17 questions by the time he'd finished explaining the first sentence, and at least 4 of them would be ones he didn't have good answers to. He thought about what it was like to be useful, to be good at something, to have a reason to get up and go somewhere and come home having done something that mattered. He thought about Claire briefly. The way she used to say, when he'd talk himself in circles about decisions that felt too big, Logan, you know what you want to do. You've always already known. He picked up his phone. He typed a reply to the number Victoria's assistant had sent. I'm in, he wrote. He put his phone down on the table. He looked at the window. The morning light was coming in at the low November angle that meant winter was close, and the street outside was regular and ordinary, and looked like it always looked. And he sat there for a minute in the apartment he'd been making do with for 2 years, with the last of the good coffee cooling in its cup. Then he got up and washed both their bowls from breakfast, because Emma would be home at 3, and the kitchen needed to be clean, and there was always something to do if you were willing to move. The first day, Logan showed up 15 minutes early because that was how he was built, and stood in the lobby of Sterling Group's headquarters for 11 minutes before anyone came to get him, which gave him enough time to feel underdressed in 3 different ways. The building was the kind of building that cost money just to be inside. Not ostentatious, actually the opposite of ostentatious, which was somehow worse because it meant whoever designed it knew that real money doesn't need to announce itself. Clean lines, muted materials, a reception desk made from a single slab of something that was either very expensive stone or a very good imitation of it. The people moving through the lobby had the particular ease of people who had never once thought about whether they belonged somewhere. Logan thought about it. He kept his face neutral and thought about it the whole 11 minutes. A young woman named Priya came to get him. She had a tablet and a lanyard and the slightly frantic efficiency of someone managing more than one thing at once. which Logan recognized from the floor at Harmon, where the good shift supervisors always moved like. She shook his hand. I'm Priya, Ms. Sterling's senior coordinator. I'll get you badged and oriented, and then she'll want to see you at 10. She was already walking. Did you find parking okay? I took the bus. Good. The parking situation here is... She made a sound that wasn't quite a word but communicated everything. We'll sort you out a transit pass. That's on my list. She sorted him out a badge and a temporary workspace on the 14th floor, an actual office, which he hadn't expected, with a door and a window that looked north toward the river, and explained the system's access she was setting up for him, and left him a printed sheet with passwords and a note that said, "Call me for anything, extension 2214. And then she was gone, and Logan sat in the office and looked at the computer. He thought about the cracked sole of Emma's left shoe. Then he opened the first file. Victoria's office was on the 22nd floor, corner placement, the kind of view that on a clear day probably stretched far enough to feel like a statement. She was on the phone when Priya walked him in at 10:05, gesturing him toward a chair in a way that managed to be both an apology and a command, and he sat and waited while she finished the call in a voice he hadn't heard her use before, flat and precise and without any of the warmth she'd shown in his kitchen, like a different register she kept for different rooms. She hung up and turned to him. How's the office? It's fine, he paused. It's bigger than my bedroom. She looked like she almost said something, then went with, I'll take that as a good sign. She came around the desk and sat in the chair across from him rather than behind the desk, which he noticed. I want to walk you through the structure before we get into the records. Is that okay? That's okay. She laid it out efficiently. Sterling Group had 4 divisions, each with its own P&L, each feeding into the consolidated accounts she managed at the executive level. The executive accounts were what she'd flagged for him: procurement, vendor contracts, discretionary spend, and a category called operational liquidity that was the most recent addition and the one she least understood despite nominally approving it. Who runs the operational liquidity accounts? Logan said. Day-to-day management is my executive assistant. A pause. Marcus Hale. He's been with me for 3 years. He watched her face. It gave him very little. He has access to the bank partner routing? All the executive accounts, yes. The same routing that flagged your cards. She looked at him steadily. Yes. Logan didn't say anything else about that. He'd learned at Harmon that the worst thing you can do with a theory is speak it out loud before you have something attached to it. Spoken theories become narratives, and narratives make people defensive, and defensive people stop sharing information. He just nodded and moved on to the next question, and Victoria answered each one with the direct precision of someone who had been waiting to have this conversation for longer than she'd let herself acknowledge. Before he left her office, she said, Logan. He stopped at the door. Marcus will introduce himself today. He introduces himself to everyone. She kept her voice even. Just be normal. I'm a very normal person, Logan said. She looked at him for just a moment. I know. That's the point. Marcus Hale was exactly the kind of person Logan had learned to read carefully at Harmon. Not because people like that were always doing something wrong, but because people like that were always doing something, and knowing what that something was made everything else make more sense. He came by the 14th floor at around 2, knocked on the open door with the knuckle rap of someone who treats open doors as courtesy rather than invitation, and smiled the kind of smile that reached the right parts of the face at the right speed. Late 30s, good suit, watch. That was expensive without being loud about it. Logan Hayes. He said the name like he'd known it a while. Marcus Hale. I run the executive office. Logan stood and shook his hand. Good to meet you. Big change from distribution, I imagine. Said warmly, not dismissively, but Logan noted that Marcus already knew where he'd come from. Different rhythm, Logan said. Victoria runs a tight ship. You'll adapt fast. She has good instincts about people, and if she brought you in, that means something. He leaned against the doorframe with the ease of someone who makes himself at home everywhere. Don't let the scale of it intimidate you. Systems are systems. That's my read too, Logan said. Marcus smiled again. Good man. Let me know if you need anything. I know where everything is. He left. Logan watched him go down the corridor, stop to exchange a quick word with someone, laugh at something, move on. He turned back to his screen. Systems are systems. Yeah, that's the problem. Ut. For the first 2 weeks, Logan did what he'd always done when he needed to understand something. He started with what he could see and worked backward to what he couldn't. At Harmon, that had meant walking the floor, learning the actual physical logic of how goods moved versus how the system said they moved, finding the gaps between those two things. Here the floor was a spreadsheet, and the goods were money, but the principle was the same. Something moves. Something is supposed to say where it went. If those two things don't match, that's where you start. He pulled the operational liquidity records for the past 24 months, which took 3 days to get full access to because 2 of the access permissions required secondary authorization, and the secondary authorizations kept routing through Marcus's office, which Logan logged without commenting on. Victoria noticed the delay before he mentioned it. She rerouted the authorization through Priya, who got it done in 40 minutes. Was that a test? Logan asked her when she told him. No, she said. It was information. He appreciated that she said it that way. The records, when he finally got into them fully, were not obviously wrong. That was the first thing that struck him. Whoever had been managing this had been managing it carefully, which meant they were good at what they were doing or had been careful about what they were doing, or both. The anomalies weren't the kind that announced themselves. They were the kind you found by reading the same data multiple times in different orders and noticing that the same number appeared in 2 different contexts without a clean explanation. Logan found the first one on a Thursday afternoon while Emma was at her after-school program. He was eating a sandwich at his desk. He'd started bringing lunch because the building's cafe made him feel like he was spending money he was still not entirely sure he should be spending, and he almost moved past it, a vendor payment. $42,000 routed through the operational liquidity account to a consulting firm called Meridian Advisory Group, logged under Market Research and Strategic Counsel. Logan had seen 3 other payments to Meridian over the past 20 months, similar amounts, similar descriptions. He looked up Meridian Advisory Group. It had a website. The website had the correct number of pages and the correct kind of language and no specific information about anyone who worked there. He sat for a while. Then he opened a new document and started a list. Emma noticed he was different. She didn't say it that way. She was 7. She said things the way she meant them, which was usually more direct than the way adults said things. She said, "You look less tired." They were on the couch after dinner, Emma working on a school project about ecosystems, Logan trying to read a financial overview document he'd printed out and brought home. He put the document on the cushion beside him. "I feel less tired," he said. "Is the new job better than the old job?" "So far." "Do you like your boss?" He thought about Victoria Sterling standing at a bus stop counting coins in the dark. He thought about the way she'd sat in his kitchen, straight-backed and slightly too careful, drinking her own coffee from his mismatched mug. "She's interesting," he said. Emma looked at him with a diagnostic expression that was unsettling in a child. "Interesting like good or interesting like complicated?" Emma. "What?" "Ecosystems," he said, and pointed at her project. She returned to it, satisfied, in the way of someone who has gotten more information than the conversation technically provided. He picked up his document. He was still thinking about that look on Victoria's face when he'd mentioned Marcus. Not fear exactly, more like the specific sadness of being wrong about someone you'd trusted, which was something he understood well enough that he hadn't needed to ask her about it. He understood it from Claire's diagnosis, from the doctors who'd said the thing they said in the careful language they used, and he'd driven home and sat in the car in the driveway for 20 minutes because there was simply no mental path from where he'd been that morning to where he was now, and he needed time to find one. Being wrong about something you believed in didn't break you, usually, but it cost you something, and you didn't always know what until later, when you reached for it and found it wasn't there anymore. He hoped Victoria got to keep most of whatever Marcus had cost her. He went back to the document. 3.5 weeks in, Victoria came to his office. She did this occasionally, not often, and never announced, which Priya had warned him about in a tone that suggested it was a known phenomenon. She'd come in, sit in the chair across from his desk, and they'd talk through what he was finding. She asked good questions. She didn't rush him toward conclusions he hadn't reached yet, which he was grateful for. This time she came in at 6:15, which meant the floor was mostly empty. She sat down with a coffee and looked at the organized disaster of documents he'd arranged across every flat surface. "Tell me what you have," she said. He turned from the whiteboard he'd been using, an actual whiteboard, which he'd requested on day 2 over Priya's mildly surprised expression, and looked at her. "Meridian Advisory Group," he said. 4 payments over 20 months. $168,000 total, all logged under operational liquidity as strategic consulting. No deliverables in the file, no meeting records, no correspondence with any Meridian contact in the company email system. Victoria held her coffee. "Consulting fees without documentation aren't automatically—" "I know, I kept going." He moved to a different section of the board. "The payments to Meridian originate from a sub-account of the operational liquidity pool. The sub-account was opened 14 months ago. The authorization was yours. Your digital signature." She was very still. "I've seen the document," he said. "It looks right. The formatting is right. The metadata is right. The signature block is right." He paused. "But you signed 14 other documents that same week, and the font spacing in the signature block on this one is 0.3 millimeters different from every other one. It's not visible to the naked eye. I only caught it because I print things out and I was looking at them side by side." She set her coffee down. "Someone forged my signature on a financial authorization." "That's my read." She was quiet for a long moment. "Marcus handles document preparation for my signature. He prepares the packets, I sign, he files." "Yes." "He would have access to the digital signature template." "He would." The office was quiet. Outside the window, the city was doing what cities do at 6:15. Lights coming on in the buildings across the street, the day dimming toward evening, indifferent and ongoing. "There's more," Logan said. "Tell me." He moved to the third section of the board. "The vendor who robbed you 2 weeks ago. The 2 men who pulled your driver out of the car." He turned to face her. "I found a cash transfer from the Meridian sub-account, dated 4 days before the robbery. $8,500 routed through 2 intermediary accounts to a cash disbursement service that does payroll for what the filing describes as temporary contract labor." Victoria looked at him. "I can't prove directly that that money paid those men," he said. "The chain is indirect. But the timing, the amount, the structure of the routing, it's not a coincidence I can explain another way." She stood up slowly, not in distress exactly, in the way of someone who has had a thing confirmed that they already half knew, which is its own specific kind of heavy. "He tried to have me stranded," she said. Not a question. "I think he needed you out of the building and out of contact for a window of time. The robbery happened the night before the quarterly financial review. If you'd been there, I would have seen the sub-account report." She turned toward the window. "He was buying himself time, or buying himself a chance to adjust the numbers before I looked." "That's what it looks like." She was quiet for a moment. "How much is missing total? Not just the Meridian payments." Logan had been expecting this question. He'd been working up to it for 2 days. "That part is harder. The Meridian payments are clear, but there are other patterns, smaller transactions, harder to trace, that I haven't fully mapped yet. My estimate is somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 across the full period, maybe more." He watched her face. "I wanted to be certain before I said a number, but you're asking me directly." She turned back from the window. She didn't look devastated. She looked like someone whose suspicion had hardened into something she could work with. "What do we need to do this right?" she said. "To make sure it holds up. I need 2 more days on the sub-account trail, and we need to get the forged authorization document to someone who can certify the signature analysis. I can't be the only one who says it." He paused. "And we need to do this without Marcus knowing we're doing it." She looked at him. "He still comes by your office." "Every few days. Friendly, helpful." "Does he know what you're working on?" "He thinks I'm doing a general operational review for a board presentation." Logan said it flatly. "I've been careful about what I leave on the screen when he comes by." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite warmth, more like recognition. "You've done this before. Not this exactly. But this, looking for what's wrong in something that looks right." He thought about the inventory at Harmon, the flag he'd entered at 7:14 in the morning, the 9-line letter. "I've had practice," he said. She nodded slowly. "2 more days," she said. "I'll get a document forensics contact standing by. I've used them for contract disputes before. They're discreet. And Logan—" She stopped. "What?" She looked at him with a directness that had nothing constructed in it. "You've been here less than a month. I know. And you found this. It was there to find. Other people had access to these records for months." She didn't say anything else with that sentence, just let it sit. He understood what she meant by it, and he didn't know quite what to do with it, so he did what he usually did when something landed in a way he hadn't prepared for. He looked at the whiteboard. "I'll have the rest pulled together by Friday," he said. She picked up her coffee. "Friday," she agreed. At the door she paused. "How's Emma?" The question was small and came from a different register entirely. He looked up. "She's good. She's got a project on ecosystems. She's very committed to correctly representing the nitrogen cycle." Victoria's mouth moved. "How old?" 7. 7-year-olds are serious about the nitrogen cycle. She is serious about most things. Victoria looked at him for a moment. There was something in her face that he couldn't quite read and didn't try to. Then she nodded once and walked out, and he heard her heels on the hallway floor receding toward the elevator. He turned back to the whiteboard. He looked at the line he'd drawn between the cash disbursement and the date of the robbery and the date of the quarterly review, the triangle of those 3 points, the thing that it said when you connected them. Marcus Hale had been in that office for 3 years. He'd probably had coffee with Victoria hundreds of times. He'd carried her files and managed her calendar and handled the small, invisible infrastructure of her working life. And somewhere in all of that he'd decided to take from her, carefully and consistently, and with enough patience that he'd almost gotten all the way out. Logan thought about being accused of something he hadn't done and walking out of a building he'd worked in for 4 years with a manila envelope and no coat. He turned off the office light and got his jacket. It was late enough that Emma would be in bed by the time he got home, which he hadn't planned and couldn't do anything about now. He texted the neighbor who sat with her on late nights, "On my way. Thanks for staying. There's money on the counter," and took the elevator down. In the lobby, the building was almost empty. The security guard at the desk nodded at him. Logan nodded back. He pushed through the revolving door and out into the cold. Friday, he thought. 2 more days. He had work to do. Friday came the way difficult days usually do. Ordinary on the surface, the same coffee, and the same commute, and the same security guard nodding in the lobby. And underneath all of that, a current that Logan had learned to recognize from years of days that looked like one thing and turned out to be another. He'd been at his desk since 7. The document forensics contact Victoria had arranged, a woman named Dr. Patricia Osei, who ran a private authentication firm and had the specific manner of someone who has testified in enough courtrooms to find nothing surprising anymore, had sent her preliminary report at 6:48 in the morning. Logan had read it twice before he'd finished his coffee. The signature on the sub-account authorization was not Victoria Sterling's. Dr. Osei had given it 4 pages, carefully qualified with comparison matrices and a technical methodology section, but the conclusion was clean. The digital signature had been constructed using a template derived from a legitimate document, modified at the metadata level to carry a false timestamp, and inserted into the authorization packet. Whoever had done it understood the system well enough to know what would be checked and what wouldn't. They'd been right, mostly. They just hadn't counted on someone printing things out and holding them side by side under a desk lamp at 11 at night. Logan added the report to the folder on his desktop and went back to the sub-account trail. The last piece had come together the night before. He traced the secondary routing from the cash disbursement service through a holding account registered to a numbered LLC in Delaware. Not unusual on its own, LLCs in Delaware were a standard enough structure. But the registered agent address matched an address that appeared in the Sterling Group vendor database attached to a different company entirely. A catering firm that had provided services at 2 corporate events 18 months ago. The catering firm's contact name was a variation of a name that appeared in the personal references section of Marcus Hale's original employment application. Not the same name. A variation, the kind of variation that suggested effort. Logan had sat with that for a long time. It wasn't the smoking gun taken together, pointed in one direction with enough consistency that the direction stopped being a theory and started being a conclusion. He wrote it up the way he'd written everything else. No editorializing, just sequence and evidence and source, the kind of document you could hand to a lawyer without having to explain yourself. He printed it. He added it to the folder. He looked at what the folder had become. Then he called Victoria. She was in his office 12 minutes later, which meant she'd been in the building already and moving fast. She was wearing the dark blazer again, the one he'd started to think of as her working on something look, and she closed the door behind her without being asked. He handed her the folder. She read standing up. He'd noticed she did that. When something mattered, she didn't sit. She stayed on her feet like sitting would cost her something. She read for 7 minutes without saying anything, turning pages with the deliberate speed of someone making sure they understand before they react. When she got to the last page, she closed the folder. The LLC, she said. The registered agent address ties to the catering company. The catering company ties to a name in Marcus's employment file. It could be coincidence. It could be. He met her eyes. But we have the forged signature, the Meridian payments with no deliverables, the cash transfer timed 4 days before the robbery, and now a shell structure that traces back to someone in his personal history. That's not coincidence stacked on coincidence stacked on coincidence. She turned toward the window. He'd seen her do this before, and not to avoid a conversation, but to give herself a moment where her face wasn't visible while she processed something. He let her have it. 3 years, she said, mostly to the glass. I know. He was good at his job, not just the theft. I mean, the actual job. He was good at it. That's usually how it goes. Logan kept his voice even. People who are good at something legitimate are also good at using that skill for other things. He understood your authorization processes because he managed them. He knew what you'd look at because he prepared what you looked at. She turned back. How much? Final number. 380,000, confirmed. There may be another 40 to 60 that I can't attach cleanly to him yet. Some of those could be documentation errors or misclassified expenses rather than deliberate fraud. I don't want to overstate it. She nodded slowly. The way she absorbed the number, not flinching, just incorporating it, told him she'd already been preparing herself for something in this range. What do we do now? That's your call, Logan said. This is your company. I can tell you what I found and how I found it, but what comes next is your decision. She looked at him. What's your read? He thought about it, not about what she wanted to hear, about what was actually true. He's been careful for a long time. If he finds out someone's been in these records, he'll know the window is closing. I don't know what he does at that point. People who've been careful for a long time don't always stay careful when they think they're about to be caught. You think he'd run? I think he's smart enough to have a plan for this. Whether that plan involves staying and fighting or leaving fast, I don't know. But I wouldn't wait to find out. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I need to call legal counsel, and I need to contact the financial crimes unit. I have a contact there from a previous situation, different matter. She said it with a brief compression of expression that he didn't ask about. I need you to make 2 copies of everything in that folder. One for legal, one for the investigators. The originals stay locked. Already printed a second set. He opened his desk drawer. She took both copies. She looked at the folder in her hands for a moment. Logan? Yeah. I want to be there when they bring him in. He understood why she wanted it. He also understood it was complicated. Is that advisable? Probably not. She said it flatly. But it's what I want. He didn't argue with that. Some things you were entitled to want, even if the wanting was complicated. It took 2 days to coordinate. Legal counsel needed to review the documentation, which they did in a single long session that Logan sat through, and which involved questions he'd been prepared for, and a few he hadn't. The financial crimes unit detective, a tired-looking man named Reyes who spoke in short sentences and had the slightly flattened expression of someone who had seen versions of this story before, reviewed the folder and asked for the underlying digital files, which Priya transferred securely. He came back the following morning and said the word that Victoria had been waiting to hear: sufficient. In the meantime, Marcus came by Logan's office once more. It was the day before everything moved, and Logan was sitting at his desk with a document on the screen that had nothing to do with what he'd been working on. He'd been careful about that, switching screens when footsteps came down the corridor. When Marcus knocked and leaned in. "How's the board presentation coming?" he said. "Getting there?" Logan spun the chair slightly. "A lot of data to organize." "It's always the organizing that takes the time." Marcus looked at the screen with the easy curiosity of a man who has no reason to be suspicious of what he might see. "You want me to take a look?" "I've put together a few board decks. I know what Victoria usually wants in terms of format." "I think I've got it." Logan kept his expression neutral. "But I'll let you know if I get stuck." "Offer stands." Marcus straightened. "You free for lunch today? There's a place on the 3rd floor. Decent sandwiches, better than the cafe." "I've got something at my desk, but thanks." "Rain check." He tapped the doorframe once, the same knuckle rap as always. "Let me know about that format question." He left. Logan waited until he heard the elevator, and then he sat very still for a moment. He thought about the 9-line letter and the HR office, and the way Marcus had said, "I know where everything is" on Logan's first day, like it was a straightforward offer of help and nothing else. He turned back to his actual screen. One more day. Wow. The morning it happened, Victoria called Logan at 7:30. He was getting Emma's bag ready. It was a Thursday, which was library day, which meant Emma wanted 2 extra books in her bag for some reason Logan had never fully understood but had stopped questioning. "Today," Victoria said. "Okay." "Reyes has his people in place by 9. Marcus usually gets in between 8:40 and 8:50. A pause. "I need you here." "I'll be there." He looked at Emma, who was standing in the hallway with her coat half on, watching him on the phone with her diagnostic expression. "I need to drop my daughter at school first." "What time does school start?" 8. "I'll send a car." He almost said no. The reflex was immediate. He was not good at being helped. But he thought about the timing and said, "Okay, thank you." He hung up and looked at Emma. "Was that your boss?" she said. "Yes." "The interesting one?" He handed her her bag. "Put your coat all the way on." She put her coat all the way on, clearly filing this for later. The car dropped him at the building at 8:22. Priya met him in the lobby with a badge and a coffee and the particular expression of someone who knows something significant is happening and has been instructed to behave normally. "She's on 22, Priya said. "Detective Reyes is in the conference room on that floor. 2 of his people are in the building already." She said it very quietly, leaning slightly in the way people lean when they're being discreet. "Marcus isn't in yet." "Thanks, Priya." He took the elevator to 22. Victoria was standing at the window in her office, not at her desk, with her back to the door. When he came in, she turned around. She looked like she'd been there a while. There were 2 coffee cups on the table by the window, one empty, one half full. And she had a stillness that he recognized as the far end of a long night rather than the beginning of a morning. "Did you sleep?" he said. "Not especially." She said it without complaint, just information. "You?" "Enough." He sat down. "Reyes knows what he's doing. His people will handle it." "I know." She looked at the window again. "It's not that I'm worried about the mechanics." "What is it?" She was quiet for a moment. "I hired him. I vetted him. I trusted him with everything. My schedule, my documents, my accounts." She turned to look at Logan with a directness that had something raw in it. "The robbery. That night at the bus stop. My driver was hurt. It was nothing serious, but he was hurt. And it happened because Marcus decided I needed to be out of the picture for 48 hours. She paused. "I keep coming back to what would have happened if he decided he needed more time than that." Logan didn't say anything immediately. He thought about what it cost to say that out loud, to name the shape of a fear that had probably been sitting at the edge of everything for the past month. "You weren't alone that night," he said. It came out simpler than he'd intended. She looked at him. "I mean, you were. I know you were. But then you weren't." He felt slightly awkward saying it, but kept going. And then you went to the hotel and you figured out what happened, and you came back and you did what you're doing right now. That's not nothing. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked away, and he saw her jaw move slightly in the way it moved when she was controlling something. "Thank you," she said. "For which part?" "For not saying something that sounds better than it is." He was about to respond when Priya's voice came through on Victoria's desk phone. Just her name, 2 syllables, but with a particular quality. Victoria crossed to the desk and pressed the button. "Yes." "He's in the lobby," Priya said. Yet, they watched from the conference room doorway. Reyes had positioned it well. Marcus would come off the elevator and cross the floor toward his office without any reason to think anything was different, because everything looked the same. The people at their desks were at their desks. The corridor had the same quality of a regular morning. Marcus came off the elevator at 8:47. He was carrying a coffee from somewhere outside the building. He had his jacket over one arm. He was looking at his phone, already into something, moving with the ease of a man who walks through this space every morning and has no reason to walk through it differently. He made it about 6 steps before he looked up and saw Reyes. Reyes wasn't in uniform. He was in a jacket and tie. But there was something about the stillness of the 2 men flanking him that didn't read as colleagues or visitors, and Marcus stopped walking with the specific quality of someone whose body has understood something before their mind has caught up. "Marcus Hale?" Reyes said. The coffee cup in Marcus's hand shifted. Not dropped. He didn't drop it. He held it. He held it, and he looked at Reyes, and he looked at the 2 men, and then, very slowly, his eyes moved down the corridor to where Victoria was standing. They looked at each other across the length of the floor. Logan was standing slightly behind and to the right of her. He watched Marcus's face. The calculation was visible, not long, maybe 3 seconds, as if Marcus was running the math on whatever options still existed and arriving at the answer that there weren't any. He set the coffee cup down on the nearest desk. "I'd like to call my attorney," he said. He said it to Reyes, not to Victoria. "You can do that," Reyes said. "Absolutely." One of the officers stepped forward. Marcus didn't move, which Logan respected in a bleak sort of way. He kept his hands visible, and he didn't look at Victoria again, and that, the deliberate not looking, said more than anything else that happened in those 30 seconds. They walked him to the elevator. The doors closed. The floor was very quiet. Victoria stood still for a moment. Then she turned and walked back into the conference room and sat down at the table, and Logan followed her in and left the door open because the room felt like it needed air. Reyes came in a minute later. He set his notebook on the table. "That's the easy part," he said without preamble. "Now there's a lot of paperwork." "I know," Victoria said. "We'll need you for a formal statement this afternoon if that works. And your analyst," he looked at Logan, "will need to walk us through the financial documentation for the record." "That's fine," Logan said. Reyes nodded once. He had the practiced non-reaction of someone who has closed a lot of rooms like this one. "Nice work on the paper trail," he said to Logan. "That forged signature catch was the linchpin. Most people would have missed it." He left. Victoria and Logan sat at the conference table. On the floor outside, people had begun talking again, the normal murmur of a workday resuming. "He's going to have a good lawyer," Victoria said. "Probably. And a good lawyer is going to look for every gap in the documentation." "There aren't many gaps." Logan said it not boastfully, just factually. He'd made sure. "The chain is clean, Dr. Ose's analysis is solid, the LLC connection will take more work on Reyes's end, but the forgery and the Meridian payments are tight." She nodded. She was looking at the table, at the grain of the wood, at nothing in particular. "Are you okay?" he said. She looked up. "I will be." She paused. "That's a different thing from okay right now, but it's the honest answer." "That's a good answer." She was quiet for a moment, then, "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Answer honestly and make it sound like it's enough." He thought about Emma at the kitchen table asking, "What if you don't find one?" and the way he'd looked at her and said, "I will figure it out," and meant both the literal thing and the other thing underneath it. Practice, mostly, and having a 7-year-old who can tell when you're hedging. She almost smiled. The almost smile had been getting more frequent, and he'd been trying not to notice. "Tell me about Emma," she said. It wasn't a deflection. It was the tone of someone who genuinely wanted to be in a different room in their own head for a minute. So he told her. He told her about the nitrogen cycle project and the library books and the way Emma made the face she'd inherited from Claire when she thought you were being slightly stupid. He told her about the ongoing story they were building, about Mira and the birds and the missing lighthouse keeper, and how Emma had recently introduced a subplot involving a talking seal that Logan felt was tonally inconsistent but had been overruled. Victoria listened with her chin in her hand and her coffee getting cold and her face doing something he hadn't seen it do before. Relaxing, not performing composure, just present. She laughed at the seal subplot. An actual laugh, not the managed one. "She sounds like a person," Victoria said. "She's extremely a person. Not everyone's kid is. Some kids are just kind of ambient." She tilted her head. "Emma sounds like she has opinions. She has opinions about everything. The nitrogen cycle, the seal subplot, whether I've been sleeping enough." He paused. "She asked me if you were interesting or complicated." Victoria blinked. "What did you tell her?" "I told her to work on her ecosystems project." She looked at him for a moment with an expression he didn't try to read. Then she picked up her cold coffee. "Smart," she said. She didn't buy it. "They never do." He looked at her across the conference table. This woman who had sat beside him at a bus stop counting coins, who had shown up in 3 SUVs outside his apartment building, who had handed him a folder of impossible access and said, "I need someone I can trust," with the weight of someone who doesn't say that easily. And he thought about how strange it was, the chain of things that connected that bus stop bench to this conference room table. Strange and also, he thought, not random. Not in the way that mattered. He didn't say any of that. He was not a man who said things like that out loud. At least not yet. At least not without knowing what the ground felt like first. He stood up. "I should get back to my office. Reyes is going to want those files organized before this afternoon." "Yes." She stood too. "Logan." He looked at her. "When this is done," she said, choosing the words carefully, "I want Emma to come see the building, if she wants. The view from up here is good." He thought about Emma at a 22nd floor window, nose against the glass, asking 17 questions about what she was seeing. "She'd like that," he said. Victoria nodded, just once. Then she turned toward her office, and Logan went back down the corridor toward his, and behind him he could hear the normal sounds of the floor resuming, keyboards and phone calls, and the particular white noise of a building full of people who had no idea what the last 40 minutes had been, going about a perfectly ordinary Thursday. Outside, the November city moved in its ordinary way. Logan sat at his desk and pulled up the file structure for Reyes and began organizing from the beginning, one document at a time, the way he'd learned to do everything, carefully, without shortcuts, building something that would hold. The weeks after Marcus's arrest had a particular quality. Not relief exactly, more like the feeling after a loud noise stops and your ears are still adjusting to the quiet. The company moved through its own version of that adjustment. Internal reviews, legal depositions, a board communication that Victoria drafted and redrafted 4 times before she sent it. A round of interviews with Reyes's team that took most of a week and left the executive floor with the slightly scoured feeling of a room that's been thoroughly cleaned. Logan was deposed twice. He gave the same answers both times because they were the same answers. He didn't have a version of events. He had what he'd found and how he'd found it, and those things didn't change based on who was asking. The second attorney seemed frustrated by this, which Logan took as a reasonable sign that he was doing it right. Through all of it, the work continued. Victoria had promoted Priya into the executive office role on an interim basis, which Priya handled with the focused competence of someone who had been doing the job informally for 2 years already and was simply now doing it with a different title. Logan's own role had shifted without anyone formally describing the shift. He was still technically an operations analyst, but the work he was doing had expanded past any reasonable definition of that title, and neither he nor Victoria had stopped to discuss it, which suited them both. He was also, for the first time in years, comfortable. He noticed this on a Tuesday morning in December, standing at the window of his office with coffee, watching snow move sideways across the river. He noticed it the way you notice something that's been true for a while but hasn't been named. Not an arrival, more like a recognition. He had enough. Emma had new shoes, both of them, and a winter coat that actually fit, and the field trip money, and the electric bill was paid, and the rent was paid, and there was food in the kitchen carefully rationed. The pull-out couch was still a pull-out couch, but he'd bought a real mattress for it, and the difference was significant. He felt, in a way he hadn't let himself feel in a long time, like he was going to be okay. He carried that quietly and didn't talk about it, because it still felt slightly fragile, the way good things sometimes do when you're not used to them staying. And so Victoria came down to his office less frequently now that the crisis had resolved, which made sense. There was less that required the particular kind of collaboration they'd built in those weeks. But the visits didn't stop entirely, and when they happened, they lasted longer than they probably needed to, and they talked about things that had nothing to do with work more often than they talked about things that did. He noticed this too. He was honest enough with himself to notice it. She'd asked about Emma's field trip, the ecosystem one, to the Natural History Museum. And he'd told her about it with more detail than was strictly necessary. And Victoria had listened with the specific attentiveness of someone who finds the subject genuinely interesting rather than someone performing interest out of politeness. She'd asked good questions about Emma's take on the exhibits and whether the nitrogen cycle had been properly represented. And he'd laughed at that. And she'd laughed at that, and there was a moment in the middle of the laughing where he'd caught her looking at him with an expression she didn't quite put away fast enough. He'd looked at his coffee cup. She'd looked at her phone. They'd both gone back to what they were doing. Emma met Victoria for the first time on a Friday afternoon in the second week of December, 3.5 weeks after Marcus Hale had been walked out of the building. Logan had brought Emma to the office after school because the neighbor who usually sat with her had a family thing and the after-school program didn't run Fridays, and Emma had been promised a view from the 22nd floor and had not forgotten this promise in the intervening weeks. She walked into the lobby holding her backpack with both straps on, looking at the ceiling and the stone floor and the revolving door with the thorough assessment of someone who intends to have an opinion. "It's big," she said. "Most office buildings are." "The floor is shiny." She looked at Logan. "Do they have to clean it every day?" "Probably." "What with?" He had a badge for her at the desk. Priya had arranged it, with Emma's name printed on it in full, which Emma held with a gravity that suggested she understood it was an official document. They took the elevator to the 14th floor first so Logan could pick up a file, and Emma stood in his office and looked at his whiteboard. He'd cleared it after the case, but there were ghost marks of old marker that hadn't wiped completely clean. And at his desk, and out his north-facing window at the river. "The river is right there," she said. "It's right there." "Can you see it from your desk?" "When I remember to look up." She seemed to find this mildly negligent. She turned from the window and looked at the room with her diagnostic expression. "It's a good office," she said, with the tone of someone who has evaluated several offices and is giving a considered verdict. "I'm glad you think so. Better than your old one." "I didn't have an office at my old one." She considered this. "Then it's much better." They took the elevator up to 22. Priya met them with a smile that was genuine and slightly charmed, and Emma immediately asked Priya what her job was and whether she liked it, which Priya answered with the appropriate seriousness the question deserved. Logan steered Emma gently down the corridor before she could ask about compensation. Victoria was in her office when they knocked. She looked up from her desk and something shifted in her expression when she saw Emma, not what Logan expected, not the slightly cautious warmth adults usually perform for other people's children, but something more immediate than that. She stood up. Emma walked in and looked at the view before she looked at Victoria, which Logan thought was accurate. "That's very far," Emma said, about the view. "It goes a long way," Victoria agreed. Emma turned to look at her. She did the full assessment, not rude, just thorough, the same way she'd assessed the lobby and the floor. "Are you Miss Sterling?" Emma said. "I am. You can call me Victoria." Emma seemed to think about whether this was appropriate given the context. She apparently decided it was. "I'm Emma." "I know. Your dad told me about the nitrogen cycle." Emma looked at Logan with an expression that said she had known there was more going on in that phone call than he'd let on. Then she looked back at Victoria. "Did he tell you about the seal?" "He mentioned a subplot." "It's not a subplot," Emma said, with the clarity of someone settling a long-running argument. The seal is a main character. Dad doesn't understand story structure. Victoria pressed her lips together in a way that meant she was controlling a laugh. The seal sounds important. The seal knows where the lighthouse keeper went. Dad didn't want to go in that direction, but I convinced him. Good instinct, Victoria said. Emma glanced at Logan with something approaching triumph and then turned back to the window. Can I stand closer? You can stand right at the glass if you want, Victoria said. Emma went to the window. She stood there for a full minute without talking, which was unusual enough that Logan watched her. She had her hands on the glass and her breath was fogging it slightly, and she was looking out at the city with a quiet intensity he recognized from when she was thinking about something she hadn't said yet. My mom used to like high places, Emma said. She said it to the window, not to either of them. She said everything looked better from up high. Logan went very still. Victoria looked at him. He didn't look back at her because he was watching Emma. She sounds like she had good taste, Victoria said. Her voice was careful and warm and didn't oversell it. Emma turned around. She didn't look sad exactly. She had this quality Logan had always marveled at, where she held things like that without being crushed by them, the way children can when they've grown up with something as part of their normal rather than as a loss from before. She did, Emma said matter-of-factly. Then, pivoting with the efficiency of a 7-year-old, do you want to hear about the rest of the story? The one about Mira? I can tell you the parts Dad gets right and the parts he gets wrong. Victoria sat on the edge of her desk. I absolutely want to hear that. Logan sat in the chair across from the desk and said nothing, because there was nothing to say, and watched his daughter explain the entire mythology of an ongoing bedtime story to a billionaire who listened with her full attention and asked clarifying questions about the lighthouse keeper's motivations. And he felt something happen in his chest that he wasn't ready to look at directly. He looked at it anyway. Boom! After that Friday, it became a thing, though no one formally made it a thing. Emma came by the office on the occasional late afternoon when schedules required it, and she always ended up in Victoria's office because Victoria always had something that Emma found worth talking about. A globe on the credenza, a collection of small architectural models from buildings Sterling Group had worked with, a framed photograph from a trip to somewhere with mountains that Emma wanted to know about. And Victoria was always, without performing it, interested in Emma. Logan watched this carefully. He'd watched for the performance of interest, the adult-to-child warmth that was really about impressing the adult who was also in the room. He didn't find it. Victoria talked to Emma the way she talked to Logan, directly, without condescension, like the conversation mattered and the other person in it was worth taking seriously. This, he thought, was the most dangerous thing. Not dangerous in the way that hurt. Dangerous in the way of something that changes the structure of what you've been telling yourself. He'd been telling himself, with consistent discipline, that what he felt around Victoria Sterling was gratitude, professional respect, and the natural warmth that develops between people who've been through something difficult together. He'd been telling himself this the same way he'd once told himself that Claire's symptoms were stress-related, with complete conviction and a slowly mounting pile of evidence to the contrary. He noticed the way a room felt different when she walked into it. He noticed the specific way she laughed when something actually surprised her, which was different from her social laugh, and happened less often, and felt like something given rather than something performed. He noticed that she remembered things, small things, a comment he'd made in passing 3 weeks ago, the name of Emma's school, the fact that he took his coffee without sugar, with a specificity that suggested she was paying attention in a way that wasn't accidental. He noticed all of it and filed it carefully under not relevant and went home and made dinner and helped Emma with her homework and was fine. He was mostly fine. The soccer thing started because Emma's league had end-of-season games on Saturday mornings, and Logan always went, which was simply a fact of his Saturdays the way coffee and the pull-out couch and the morning light through the kitchen window were facts. He mentioned it to Victoria in passing, not as an invitation, just as context for why he'd be offline on a particular Saturday morning. Victoria said she hadn't been to a children's soccer game in years. He said they weren't particularly exciting, as sporting events went. She said she liked the park it was held at. He said the park was nice. She said maybe she'd come by. He said that was fine. He spent Thursday and Friday not thinking about it, which occupied a surprising amount of mental energy for something he wasn't thinking about. She showed up at 8:55, 5 minutes before the game started, wearing jeans and a coat and no driver. She'd come alone, which struck him as deliberate, or maybe he was reading into it. She found them on the sideline where Logan was standing with the other parents, a cup of coffee in each hand, and handed him one. "You don't have to. I was walking past the cart," she said. "Don't overthink it." He took the coffee. Emma was already on the field in her green jersey, doing whatever 7-year-old soccer players do during the pre-game period, which primarily seemed to involve talking to the other kids and occasionally interacting with the ball. She looked up and saw Victoria on the sideline, and her face did something quick and bright that she immediately tried to make less obvious. She waved with the studied casualness of someone trying not to wave too enthusiastically. Victoria waved back without trying to make it casual at all. The game was, as advertised, not particularly exciting as sporting events went. Emma's team was 7-year-olds, which meant the game had the organized chaos quality of 7-year-olds doing a thing they'd been practicing but not quite mastering. Emma played with the intensity she brought to most things, serious about it, working hard, occasionally frustrated with herself in a way that showed in her posture. "She's good," Victoria said. She was standing close enough that Logan could hear her without her raising her voice, which meant they were closer than they usually stood, which was a fact he noted and set aside. "She's gotten better this season. She figured out passing about 6 weeks ago, and it changed the whole game for her. She looks like you when she's concentrating." He glanced at her. She was watching the field. "Same thing," she said, "with the jaw." He looked back at the field. He thought about what to say and decided on nothing. At halftime, Emma came off the field and went straight to them, which she wouldn't have done before Victoria had started showing up in their orbit. Before, she came straight to Logan and then noticed everyone else. Now she came to them, the two of them together, with the seamless unself-consciousness of a child for whom this grouping had already become normal. "Did you see the pass in the 3rd minute?" Emma demanded. "Outstanding pass," Victoria said. "I've been working on the angle." Emma looked at Logan. "Did you see it?" "I saw it." "What did you think?" "I thought it was a good pass." "That's it?" "It was a very good pass." Emma looked at Victoria. "He doesn't give detailed feedback." "Noted," Victoria said gravely. Emma shook her head at both of them and went back to her team, and Logan and Victoria stood on the sideline and watched the second half and didn't talk about whatever it was they weren't talking about, and the cold was the kind of December cold that makes you aware of warmth when you're near it. He didn't tell himself it was nothing anymore after that Saturday. That felt like a step, though it didn't look like one from outside. What he told himself instead was that it was complicated, which was true. She was his employer. She existed in a category of the world that was genuinely different from his, and not in a way that didn't matter. It mattered in ways he'd seen her navigate every day, the gap between her default and his default, between the single office and the 3 SUVs, between the coffee she'd brought to his kitchen and the kitchen it had been brought to. He didn't think she cared about that gap the way he feared she might. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that he cared about it, not with shame, but with the particular caution of a man who has rebuilt something carefully and knows the specific cost of building it and is not casual about the possibility of damage. Emma did not have this caution. Emma had the directness of someone for whom the relevant data was already in, and the conclusion was obvious. She mentioned Victoria in the same breath as other facts of her life: school, Mira, the nitrogen cycle, the seal, with the equanimity of someone who has filed things where they belong and moved on. "Victoria said there's a science museum downtown that has a real whale skeleton," Emma told him one evening. "When did you talk to Victoria?" "She texted," said without looking up from her book. "Can we go?" He looked at his phone. There was a message from Victoria. "Apparently the Natural History Wing has a full blue whale skeleton. Emma mentioned the museum. Thought she might like it." He typed back, "She would definitely like it." 3 seconds later, "Saturday?" He looked at Emma. Emma was reading her book with elaborate innocence. "Did you ask her to text me?" he said. Emma turned a page. "I mentioned the museum." Emma, "What?" She looked up with an expression of genuine openness. She likes museums. You like museums? I like museums and also whale skeletons. She turned another page. It's practical. He looked at the ceiling briefly. Saturday, he typed back. The museum was large and crowded in the way natural history museums are on December Saturdays, full of children and school groups and parents who were attempting to be educational. Emma navigated it with purpose, having apparently mapped the route to the whale skeleton in advance, and Victoria kept pace beside her while Logan followed slightly behind and watched them from that angle. Emma explaining something with her hands, Victoria listening and responding, the two of them moving through the museum with the easy coordination of people who have figured out each other's rhythm. He watched that and felt the weight of it. Not bad weight. The other kind. The kind that tells you something is real. Outside afterward, Emma wanted hot chocolate from a cart near the park entrance. Logan bought 3 cups and they stood on the path between bare trees, and Emma had chocolate on her lip and was telling Victoria the theory she'd been developing about the whale's migration pattern based on its skeleton's position, which was scientifically creative, if not technically grounded. Victoria caught Logan's eye over Emma's head. She had her cup in both hands, and there was something in her expression, unhidden, which was unusual for her, that he recognized because he'd been carrying the same thing for weeks. He looked at her for a moment longer than was casual. She looked back. Emma said, "Logan, are you listening?" He looked down at his daughter. "Migration patterns," he said. "I'm listening." Emma looked between them with the diagnostic expression. She didn't say anything. She went back to her hot chocolate with the composure of someone who has the information she needed and doesn't require further data. They walked back through the park in the cold December afternoon, Emma in the middle, because she'd arranged herself there, and the bare trees made long shadows on the path. And Logan thought about the bus stop bench and the $18 and the 9-line letter and the particular chain of things that had led from there to here. He didn't know what here was yet. He knew what it felt like, which was different. Yeah. The soccer season ended the following Saturday. Last game, end of year, the kids would get small trophies from the coach and everything would pause until spring. Logan had been to every game. Victoria had come to the last 4. Emma's team won, narrowly, on a goal in the last 3 minutes from a kid named Tyler who fell down immediately after scoring and had to be helped up. The sideline erupted with the disproportionate enthusiasm that children's sports reliably produce in adults, and Emma came off the field flushed and loud and grabbed Logan's arm with both hands. "We won," she said, like he might have missed this. "You won." "I set up Tyler's goal." She turned to Victoria. "Did you see the assist?" "The assist was the whole play," Victoria said. Emma was satisfied. She went back to her team for the trophy ceremony, and Logan and Victoria stood on the now quieter sideline while the coach gave a short speech and handed out the small plastic trophies with the yellow figures on top. "She's going to talk about that assist for weeks," Logan said. "She should." It was a good read. Victoria was watching Emma up ahead. She had her hands in her coat pockets and her breath was making small clouds in the cold air. She figured out that Tyler had the angle before he did. She does that, sees where things are going. Victoria was quiet for a moment. "She gets that from you?" He looked at her. She was still watching Emma, and she'd said it simply, not as a compliment exactly, more as an observation she'd made a while ago and was only now saying out loud. "Victoria," he said. She turned. He'd been thinking about what he was going to say for weeks, and now that he was about to say it, he wasn't sure any of the versions he'd rehearsed were right, so he let those go and said what was actually true. "I don't know how to do this correctly," he said. "I'm aware of the complications. I'm aware of what you are in my life professionally, and what that means. And I've spent a fair amount of time telling myself that's a good enough reason to leave it alone." He paused. "But I'm not able to leave it alone. And I think you know that. And I think maybe you feel the same way, and if I'm wrong about that, I'd rather know it than keep not saying it." Emma's voice carried from up the field, something about the trophy, asking whether it was okay to put it in her backpack or would it break. Victoria looked at him. She didn't look surprised. She looked like someone who has been waiting for a specific thing to happen and has been uncertain about the waiting. "You're not wrong," she said. He looked at her. "You've been careful," she said. "I noticed that. The whole time you've been careful, and I've been—" She stopped. chose the next part precisely. "I've been hoping you'd stop." He heard Emma's cleats on the frozen grass behind him, coming back toward them. "Okay," quietly. "Just that." She looked at him with the real smile, the one that changed her face, and he was aware of Emma arriving beside him, trophy held carefully in both hands, looking between them with the expression of someone who has been patient with adults for a reasonable amount of time and is prepared to continue being patient because she has already determined the direction things are going. "Can we get dinner?" Emma said. "The three of us?" Logan looked at Victoria. "The three of us," Victoria said. Emma nodded, satisfied, and started toward the parking area with the decisive stride of someone whose work here was done. Logan and Victoria looked at each other once more, briefly, with the particular helplessness of two people who have been managed by a 7-year-old and know it. Then they followed her. The dinner that night was at a place Emma chose, which meant it was a diner with red vinyl booze and a laminated menu and a pie display case by the register that Emma assessed with professional seriousness before they'd even sat down. Not the kind of place Victoria Sterling typically appeared in. She sat in the booth across from Emma and Logan with her coat folded on the seat beside her and looked at the laminated menu with genuine attention, and when Emma recommended the grilled cheese, the kind with tomato, it's important, Victoria ordered the grilled cheese without hesitation. Emma approved of this. They sat in that booth for 2 hours, not because there was a plan to sit for 2 hours. There wasn't. The food came and went in the normal time. Emma finished hers and moved on to the pie she'd identified on the way in. But because the conversation didn't find a natural place to stop. Emma talked about the soccer season and then about Mira and the lighthouse keeper and the seal, and Victoria asked the right questions, and Logan mostly ate and watched and said things when they needed to be said, and the diner moved around them with its regular Friday night business, indifferent and warm. On the walk back to the car, Emma was between them with her trophy in her bag and her hands cold because she'd lost one glove somewhere on the soccer field and Logan had the other glove in his pocket. She was telling them both about a book she wanted from the library to say something about deep-sea creatures. And she reached up without thinking and took Logan's hand on her left and Victoria's hand on her right, the way she'd once done with him and Claire on walks when she was younger, and kept talking about the deep-sea creatures without acknowledging what she'd done. Victoria looked at their joined hands. Then she looked at Logan. He looked back. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing to say that the moment hadn't already said better. The thing about beginning something when you're 32 and have been through what Logan had been through is that you don't do it the way you might have at 24. At 24, you move fast because you don't fully understand yet what there is to lose. At 32, coming out of grief and rebuilding and years of holding everything together with the particular careful stubbornness of a man who has no margin for error, at 32, you move like someone who knows the ground can shift and wants to know it's solid before he puts his full weight on it. Victoria understood this without him having to say it. That was one of the things about her, and she read people accurately and didn't require them to explain themselves at the level of subtext. She'd spent years running a company, which meant she'd spent years watching what people didn't say as closely as what they did, and she was good at the watching. They took it slowly. This meant dinner, the three of them, and then sometimes the two of them when Emma was at Becca's on Saturdays. It meant walking in the park near the office on lunch breaks that ran longer than they should have, and neither of them minding. It meant learning each other in the ordinary ways. What she was like when she was tired, what he was like when something was bothering him that he hadn't decided to say yet. The small friction points and the small discoveries. The ways that two people find out whether they fit together in the daily reality, rather than just the exceptional circumstances. There were things that weren't easy. The gap between their worlds didn't disappear because they decided to be in the same one. Victoria's life had a scale and visibility that Logan had to adjust to. Not the money, which he was self-aware enough to recognize he'd never be fully comfortable with but could live alongside, but the attention. People watched her. People had opinions about her. And when she started appearing at a diner and a soccer field and a natural history museum with a man no one had heard of, and his 7-year-old daughter, some of those people found it interesting in the way that people find other people's lives interesting when they think they're entitled to. There was a photograph taken at the park one afternoon. Logan hadn't seen it happen, some phone through a fence. The particular indignity of the modern version of being in the wrong place. and it appeared on a business news site under a headline that managed to be both mundane and slightly pointed. Victoria handled it with the practiced composure of someone who had been managing that kind of attention for years. Logan handled it less well, which he admitted to her directly. "I don't like it," he said. "The idea of someone taking a picture of Emma." They were in her office, late on a Tuesday. He'd come to tell her in person rather than text because it felt like an in-person thing. "I know," she said. "I'm sorry. Don't apologize for something you didn't do. I'm apologizing for the reality that comes with me." "That's different." She held his gaze. "I can't make it not exist, Logan. I've tried, in the past, and it doesn't go away. It just gets more important to decide whether what you have is worth dealing with what comes alongside it." He looked at her. "I'm not saying it isn't." "I know you're not." She paused. "I'm asking you to keep saying that after the third time it happens, and the 10th time." He thought about that, about the discipline of it, about choosing something not once but continuously, which was a different kind of commitment than the single moment kind, and in some ways harder and in some ways more honest. "I'll still be saying it," he said. She nodded, once, the way she did when she'd received something she believed. Emma, for her part, navigated all of it with the equanimity of a child who had decided early on what she thought and had no intention of revisiting the decision. She liked Victoria. She expressed this not in the effusive way of a child performing likability, but in the practical way of a child who includes someone in the ordinary operations of her life, asking for Victoria's opinion on the SEAL subplot revision, texting her about the deep-sea creature book, once calling her from Logan's phone to report that the library had gotten the wrong edition, and what should she do? A question Victoria answered with complete seriousness. She also talked about Claire. Not constantly. Emma had a child's instinct for when things fit in a conversation and when they didn't. But naturally, the way you talk about someone who is part of your history, and therefore part of any honest accounting of who you are. Victoria never flinched from it. She asked questions when Emma wanted to talk, and didn't push when Emma moved on, and Logan watched this happen several times with a feeling that he didn't have precise language for, but that had something to do with gratitude, and something to do with recognition, and something underneath both of those that was older and quieter. He thought about Claire sometimes in this new context, not with guilt, which had surprised him. He'd expected guilt and instead found something more like conversation, the internal kind. He thought she would have had opinions about Victoria Sterling. She would have asked sharp questions and demanded honest answers, and probably found the bus stop story so improbably cinematic that she'd have been suspicious of it, and then she would have sat with it and decided it was true, because Logan didn't have the imagination for that kind of story if it wasn't. He thought, "You would have liked her," and then more quietly, "Thank you for teaching me how to recognize someone worth staying for." He didn't say any of that out loud, but he carried it, the way you carry things that are true and private and yours. He didn't plan the proposal. That was the honest account of it, which was also the account Emma gave to everyone who asked her later, with visible satisfaction at the unplanned nature of it, as if spontaneity was the highest virtue and she had been present to witness it. It was March. The snow had mostly gone, and the park near the office had the tentative quality of early spring, cold still, but with something underneath the cold that was shifting. They walked there sometimes on weekend mornings, the three of them, because Emma liked the pond and the particular ducks that lived there and had named two of them with a confidence that assumed the ducks were consistent across weeks, which Logan had learned not to argue with. Emma was at the pond. Victoria was beside him on the path, close enough that their shoulders were nearly touching in the way they stood together now. A small physical comfort that had become ordinary without either of them deciding it. They were talking about something he'd later be unable to remember, something work-related, something about a board meeting. And he looked at Emma crouching at the edge of the pond talking to the ducks, and then he looked at Victoria, and something moved through him that wasn't a decision so much as a clarity. He had the ring. This part was slightly less unplanned. He'd had it for 3 weeks, bought it with a carefulness that was entirely consistent with his character, chosen with input from nobody because it felt like a thing he needed to do himself. He'd carried it in his jacket pocket every day since, not waiting for a moment exactly, more waiting to not be waiting anymore. He stopped walking. Victoria stopped and looked at him. He reached into his pocket. "Logan," she said. The way she said it told him she understood what was happening and that she'd been not expecting it exactly for it. The two things can be true. He didn't make a speech. He was not a speech person. He held the ring and he said, "You walked into my life from a bus stop at midnight with $4.60, and I gave you everything I had, and somehow that turned into this, and I want this. I want it the way you want something you didn't know you were missing until it was right in front of you." He paused. "I'm not always going to say the right thing, and I'm not going to stop being the person who brought a printed spreadsheet to your kitchen table, and I come with Emma, who has opinions about story structure and duck nomenclature and possibly everything else." He looked at her. "But I love you, and I've been loving you since about the third week, and I think you've known that longer than I've said it out loud." Her eyes were bright. She was not a woman who cried in the managed tears way of someone performing emotion. When things got to her, they got to her, and this was getting to her. "You practiced that," she said. "Some of it." "Which part?" "The spreadsheet line." She laughed, which made the brightness in her eyes worse in the best possible way. Behind them, Emma had heard the change in the quality of the silence and had turned from the ducks and was now standing very still at the edge of the pond with the trophy ceremony composure of someone who understood they were witnessing something important and was determined not to ruin it. "Yes," Victoria said. "Obviously, yes. I've been saying yes in my head for 3 months. He put the ring on her finger. It fit, which was one thing he'd been worried about and was quietly relieved by. She looked at it for a moment, then at him. He kissed her, in the park, in the early March cold, with Emma behind them making a sound that was either a cheer or an extremely dignified expression of satisfaction. When Logan turned around, he found it was something between the two. Emma standing at the pond's edge with both arms raised and the expression of someone who was trying to be mature about this and was only partially succeeding. "Finally," Emma said. "Emma." "I've been waiting." She came over. She looked at the ring with the seriousness of a gemologist. "It's good," she said to Victoria. "He picked it himself, I checked." Victoria looked at Logan. "You told her." "She already knew. I just confirmed it." Emma looked between them and seemed satisfied that the situation was resolving correctly. Then she looked at the pond. "The ducks didn't even notice," she said. "That's disappointing," Bas said. They married in September, not a large wedding. Victoria had the resources for large, but neither of them had the appetite for it, and Emma had been consulted and had said with characteristic directness that she didn't want to wear an itchy dress in front of a lot of strangers, which was a reasonable position. So it was small, 30 people in a garden attached to a venue outside the city, the kind of place with old trees and flagstone paths and the particular quality of late September light that makes everything look like it was always going to be this way. Priya came. Detective Reyes sent a card, which neither of them had expected and both found moving. Emma wore a dress she had approved in advance, which had no itchy parts, and carried a small bouquet she had chosen herself, and walked with Logan to the front of the space where Victoria was waiting with the composed expression of someone holding something enormous very carefully. Logan had written his own vows, which he'd written 4 times, and which were still not the thing he actually meant, but were the closest he could get to the thing he actually meant in a format that fit in a ceremony. He said, "I spent a long time thinking that keeping things together was the most I could ask for. That the job was maintenance, holding the line, not losing ground. And then one night I had nothing left to give and I gave it anyway, and somehow that changed everything." He looked at her. "You didn't rescue me. I want to be clear about that. But you showed me that the thing I thought was a ceiling was actually a floor, and I want to spend the rest of my life building up from there, with you." Victoria's vows were shorter, which surprised no one who knew her. She said, "I am good at many things. I have worked very hard to be good at many things, but I was not good at this, at trusting something outside the parts of my life I could control. And then a stranger at a bus stop showed me what it looks like to give without calculating the return, and I thought, I want to understand how a person gets to be like that." She paused. "I understand it now. It comes from knowing what matters. And you know what matters better than anyone I've ever met." She looked at Emma when she said the last part. Emma, to her credit, managed not to cry, which she'd been worried about and had mentioned twice in the week before. Her eyes went bright, and she pressed her lips together and looked at the flagstones for a moment, and then she looked up and she was fine, just bright-eyed and straight-backed and present, the way she was when things mattered. The thing nobody tells you about building a life the second time, or what feels like the second time, even if the first time was interrupted rather than completed, is that it doesn't feel like starting over. It feels like continuing, like the threads that were cut didn't disappear but went somewhere else, into the ground. And what grows up from where you plant yourself now has roots that go deeper than you can see. Logan learned this slowly, the way he learned most things, by living inside it for a while before he could name it. He learned it in the apartment that was no longer the apartment, the new place with a real bedroom for him and a bigger reading nook for Emma, and a kitchen that fit two people cooking at the same time, which it turned out was one of the things he hadn't known he'd missed. He learned it in the ordinary mornings, coffee and Emma's packed lunch, and the transit pass clipped to his jacket, and Victoria already on her phone at the kitchen table because she was always working and he'd stopped expecting her not to be. He learned it in Emma's school events, and the ducks at the park, and the ongoing story about Mira, which Victoria had become deeply invested in and had twice suggested plot directions that Emma implemented without crediting her, which Victoria found more amusing than not. He learned it at work, where his role had evolved into something that finally had a title that matched what he actually did, Director of Internal Operations, which Priya had told him was overdue, and which Logan had accepted without the complicated feelings he'd expected. He was good at his job. He had always been good at his job. It had taken being removed from one to end up somewhere that let him be good at a version of it that actually fit. He thought about the 9-line letter sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. He'd pursued the situation at Harmon, with Victoria's help and a different lawyer, and the outcome had been quiet. A settlement, a correction in their records, a process that had taken 8 months and ended without drama, which was perhaps appropriate for something that had been done without drama, just efficiency and indifference. He wasn't bitter about it. He'd been for a while, but bitter is expensive, and he had better things to spend on. Marcus Hale pled guilty on 4 counts, and received a sentence that his very good lawyer had reduced from what it could have been, which was the predictable outcome of having a very good lawyer. Victoria attended the sentencing, and Logan went with her, and they sat in the back of the courtroom, and afterwards she didn't want to talk about it, and he didn't make her. They got coffee and walked for a while, and she held his hand in the particular tight way she held it when she needed the anchor, and eventually she said, "Okay," and they went home. It was one of the moments where he understood that resolution and closure were not the same thing, and that waiting for closure was a way of putting your life on hold for something that might not arrive in the form you expected. What arrived instead was just more life, more ordinary days, more of Emma at the kitchen table and the ducks at the park and the specific sound of Victoria's laugh when something actually got to her. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was, in fact, the whole thing. The following spring, Emma's second soccer season with Victoria on the sideline, the ring now familiar on Victoria's hand, the apartment settled into with the lived-in quality that takes months to develop and can't be hurried, they went back to the park. Not on purpose, exactly. They were walking after Emma's Saturday game, and the route took them past the block with the 24-hour convenience store, and Logan stopped on the corner without deciding to. Victoria looked at him. Emma, between them, looked at the bus stop bench. "Is this—" Victoria started. "Yeah." They stood there for a moment. The bench was exactly the bench. There was nothing remarkable about it. Metal, weathered, a scuff along the back rail, a transit schedule pasted inside a dirty plastic housing. It looked like what it was, a place where people waited for buses. Unremarkable, one of hundreds in the city. "You were counting coins," Logan said. "I was very embarrassed," Victoria said. "You didn't look embarrassed." "I was extremely embarrassed. I was also—" She paused, looking at the bench. "So tired. That kind of tired where you don't know if you're going to be okay, and you're working very hard not to let yourself think that question directly." He looked at her. "And then a stranger sat down." "And then a stranger sat down." She looked at him and gave me $18 and asked for absolutely nothing. Emma was quiet beside them, looking at the bench with an expression that was doing something private. She'd heard the bus stop story more than once, not dramatized, just told, the way you tell the true stories that become the ones your family knows by heart. She understood what the bench was. She reached up and took both their hands. Not for balance, not because she needed steadying, just because it was what she did, what she had done on that December walk when the three of them first walked together, the instinct of a child who knows where she belongs. They stood there for a moment, the three of them, on the sidewalk outside the convenience store, with the March cold still in the air, and the city moving around them with its regular indifference. And Logan looked at the bench and thought about the man who had sat here with $18 and a daughter he didn't know how to protect, and a future he couldn't see clearly. He thought, you did the right thing. Even when you didn't know it was the right thing, even when doing it cost you everything you had. There is a version of that night where he walks past the bench and gets up and goes home. A version where the math is the math, and the math says you cannot give what you don't have. He understands that version. He had lived inside that version for a long time. The version where you hold what you have very tightly because losing it is not an option you can survive. But there is something that version doesn't account for, and he had learned it the way you learn things that matter, which is from the inside, which is from living it. The tightest hands lose things too. The people who give nothing away are not safe. They're just differently alone. What he'd given that night wasn't $18. It was the decision, made in a single unguarded moment, to be the kind of person who still believed other people were worth it. After everything, after Claire, after the bills and the pull-out couch and the 9-line letter, after all of the ways the world had told him to close up and hold on. He'd decided not to. And here was what that decision had become, standing on either side of him in the March morning, warm and real and his. Okay, Emma said, with the finality of someone concluding a significant moment. Can we get breakfast? Victoria made a sound that was almost a laugh. You ate at the game. That was granola. That's not breakfast. She looked up at both of them with complete seriousness. I'd like eggs. Logan looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Logan. The diner does eggs, Logan said. The diner does excellent eggs, Victoria confirmed. Emma released their hands and started walking in the direction of the diner with the decisive stride that was entirely her own, the stride of someone who had organized the morning to her satisfaction and was ready for the next part. Logan and Victoria followed her, close enough that their hands found each other again without either of them reaching. Just that simple gravitational thing, fingers folding together, comfortable in the way that only comes from being chosen and choosing back, day after day, in the ordinary moments that are not ordinary at all. The city went on around them. The bench sat empty on the corner. The morning was cold and clear and full of whatever came next. That was enough. It always had been. You just had to give yourself a chance to find out.